Hello, music makers. Welcome back. I've got 3 types of Reese bass to show you how to make them, both modern and old school, and also a common problem to watch out for when doing so. Let's go. You know, I wasn't going to make a Reese bass video. This iconic bass sound has been covered well already, but after reading an interview with the man himself, it turns out for decades, the way most people thought it was made is wrong. Sounds like a good excuse to dive into some sound design geekery, don't you think? First of all, let me show you how they are usually made these days. So, what makes a good Reese bass? Well, one of the main characteristics of the sound is beats. No, I don't mean drum beats. This is a scientific audio term called beating. It's when 2 sounds beat off each other. Oh no, I can't say that, can I? No. Let me rephrase that. It's when 2 sounds interfere with each other. No, that's just as bad. Okay, just let me show you. Okay, if we play a single sine wave on the note A, A1, that should be 110 hertz. Yes, 110 vibrations per second. Sounds like this. By the way, if you're listening on phone, you might not be able to hear this. If I play back a sharp one, that's 116.5. So as you can hear, slightly higher, but both of those on their own are smooth, consistent, solid tones. Now, if I play them at the same time, hear that pulsing? That is beating. What you are hearing is that difference in cycles as an interference pattern. Even though 6.5 hertz is too low a frequency on its own to hear with the human ear, you can now hear it as an interference pattern between our tones here. We can highlight this even more by distorting it. Now, even if we keep the relative distance of our notes the same, if we change pitch, this beating will actually change speed. If we go up 1 octave, for example, that A is no longer 110, it's double, it's 220. And the distance between these notes, that semitone, is no longer 6.5. It's now going to be 13 times a second. So even with the same distance of notes, as we change pitch, you're going to hear that interference pattern speed up and slow down. Here's up 1 octave. And back down. Here's down the octave. Almost sounds like we've got a filter doing the wub-wubs, doesn't it? But no, that's just interference. And it's key to a good Reese bass. Now, let me show you how that occurs inside our synth. So, for the longest time, people thought the original Reese bass was made on a Juno synth, classic subtractive synth. Because if you start with a saw wave, add a couple of friends, detune them a little, filter them, Reese bass, or certainly close enough. You can also do it this way. Add more with unison and detune those. It's the same thing, really. Really simple, but that's the basis of most modern Reese sounds. Let's look at a couple of classic examples. We can find our desires. I don't think we can talk about Reese bass without mentioning Scream's LaRue remix, can we? Let's look at the patch. I've made this with a couple of sines and almost a saw wave. I noticed even with a steep filter, Scream's Reese bass was darker than I could achieve with a pure saw wave. So I found this softer one from the free Echo Soundworks pack. It's from a Brute. Most of the interference is coming from the sine waves. Those are detuned 55 cents in opposite directions. By the way, if you didn't know, 100 cents equals a semitone. So these are actually closer to the next note than they are the note we're playing. Very messy, in the best way, of course. Oh, by the way, did you hear that distortion with the vocal? I've done my best to emulate it here. I think it's definitely part of the appeal of the original. You're hearing the bass modulate the vocal, and when a low frequency modulates a higher frequency, like a vocal, we call that low frequency intermodulation distortion. I did a video on it last week. Go check it out. Oh, by the way, just in case you didn't know, there's a separate lead sound from a sine wave on top. Here's the bass on its own. One of my recent favourites, Lude's remix of Down Under. A particularly nasty Reese. Inevitably, as people were just filtering saw waves, in the more hype genres that required more aggression, it makes sense you would just open up those filters. So this one I used unison instead. 2 extra voices in unison. By the way, if you're trying to recreate this 100% isn't the same as default. I've limited this to 0.6. It defaults to 2 semitones normally, which is way too wide. So we've added 2 extra voices. This time I've gone for a Moog saw wave, again from that free Echo Soundworks pack, and they are detuned 60 cents in each direction, giving us that unstable beating pulse. Filled out the bottom end with just a solid single sine wave. To get a little bit closer to the reference, I've pulled some mids out there, emphasised a bit of that top buzz, and the last little bit of nastiness coming from the good old Camel Crusher. Yes, you can still get it. Perfectly appropriate for early 2000s vibes. It's not doing a lot, but it's doing just enough. Now, last but not least, the OG. Where does it come from? How was it made? Just in case anyone doesn't know, the name Reese Bass comes from a track called Just Want Another Chance by Reese, 1988. Reese, aka Kevin Reese Saunderson, he was one of the Belleville Three, basically the founders of Techno. We've talked about them in the Strings of Life video. Anyway, the sound pioneered on that record, but Reese Bass didn't really become a thing until it was sampled on the legendary jungle record Terrorist by Renegade, aka Ray Keith, where it really took off. Kevin has said he didn't even know of the term Reese Bass until he visited London. So it initially spread as a sample, but inevitably people would want to make their own. And with subtractive synths being the most common type, they would make the sounds with those, like Junos. However, it has come to light in an interview that Mr. Saunderson did not use a Juno. In fact, he did not even use a subtractive synth. The sound was actually made on a Casio CZ5000. Why is that so interesting, you ask? Well, Casio CZ synths don't use subtractive synthesis. They use a very rare kind of synthesis called phase distortion. Casio CZ synths don't even have filters. The full spectrum of sound from those synths is achieved by distorting the wave itself, usually a sine wave. I won't go into it anymore. If you want a video on Casio CZs, they are responsible for some other classic dance sounds, by the way, let me know in the comments. So the big question is, can we do phase distortion synthesis in Vital or Serum? Most of the features, no. But what we need to make a Reese bass, just about, yes. So here's my approximation of phase distortion synthesis. You can see, even though we don't have a filter, we can still control the brightness. By distorting the phase of the wave. Not exactly the same as the Casio, and that had more modes, but this one mode in Vital happens to be pretty close to how the Reese is made. As for oscillators, the Casio only had 2, And from looking at the manual, I don't think they could be detuned more than 30 cents. So I put them 30 cents in either direction here, and we end up sounding like this. So that's the OG Reese, or as close as we're going to get with Vital. Anyway, is it different enough to filtering saw waves? Probably only to sound perverts like me. But if you didn't know, now you know. Now, one last thing to mention before you go. A quick warning. There is a problem with Reese basses you need to know about. The very thing that gives them their character, that beating of frequencies, is also an issue. Because that phenomena occurs when the lowest frequencies are cancelling each other out, leading to a very lumpy bottom end. And that can be cool in things like breaks. But if you need a solid bottom end, like in your drops, Reeses are problematic. So I suggest do what I said in my bass processing video. Filter off the lowest frequencies and replace them with a separate single sine. Link in the description if you want to know more. Speaking of links in the description, you'll find all the sounds down there in the form of Vital presets. And if you want to show your appreciation, there's a link to buy me a coffee too. Or you could just leave me a comment, or a like, or a sub. And until next week, I'll see you in the comments. Bye bye.